And everybody who contributed on the stage and behind the scenes to this reunion. And without all of these people, it wouldn't have happened. I said yes.
Who found the hotel?
Now, something maybe trivial. Whoever of you who wants their branch banner are invited to take it. I can tell you that the polo one is spoken for, and others may take theirs because I'm not taking them back to Israel. So whoever wants a banner to show to other family members, or I don't know, for as a memoir, whatever, you're invited to take them. Otherwise, I don't know what happens to them. Okay, this evening is a bit different than the others we had. It's a stories evening, and people will either tell stories or read letters or... okay, before that. There are still cookbooks that if you want to buy them, some people bought more than they got. If you want some cookbooks for your other family members, you are invited to buy some more. And if you think about it later and you're in the States, you can approach Lucy. If you're in Israel, you can approach me. Okay, I'd like to call my father first to start with the stories evening.
No. So what I'm going to tell you about is actually the aftermath of the Second World War as reflected by the life of Chava and me. Because incidentally, Chava and I spent about 3 years together, our first 3 years together, just after the Second World War, with, I would say, with a kind of family story, which is also part of his story. Now, to make the scene clear, in a few strokes only, about Chava and me. Both Chava and I were born in 1926 in the Czech Republic, Chava in Bratislava, I in Prague, which is about 250 miles to the west of Bratislava. We had very much in common, but didn't know anything about that before, because the families didn't know. We both not only were born in the same year, we were both educated in the German language as mother language. We both were educated in the very optimistic atmosphere of the humanistic, democratic and liberal Czechoslovak Republic, with full hopes of a good life and of a good future. We both came from not rich, but well-established families. But there were two basic differences. One of them, Chava came from a secular family, I from a very religious one. The other one is even more important. Chava was a girl and I was a boy. We both, because we are born the same year, entered actually in the Second World War, or in the fascist and Nazi regime in our places when we were about 13 years old. And a year or so later, Jews in both places, both in Slovakia and in Prague, were forbidden to continue to attend public schools and schools altogether. Which means that Chava and I, and that's a little bit important for what I'm going to tell you, Chava and I have just finished about 8 grades of formal schooling. Then, both of us, independently of course, in our early teens, entered a Zionist youth movement called Maccabi Hatzair. Both Chava in Bratislava and I in Prague. I partly on the sly, because my father would never have. He was anti-Zionist and he was religious, and Maccabi Hatzair was not religious. But anyway, both of us were active since our early teens in the Maccabi Asir movement. Then came deportations, Auschwitz, other concentration camps. Chava came back to Bratislava and met up with some of her former friends from the youth movement. Not many had come back, but some did. And the situation was, we are speaking about 1945, Europe is starkly, after the war, in an austerity regime with much destruction all about, and especially much destruction of Jewish life particularly. And very, very soon it became clear that that was then the general atmosphere. Jewish life will not recover there after what had happened. And so the idea was to somehow reconstitute the Jewish youth movements, and I'm speaking of all of them, there were others, but among them also Maccabi Asir, only for one purpose, to collect, if possible, Jewish children and youth who had somehow survived concentration camps, in hiding in convents with the partisans, and after a short period of, say, something like retraining, sent them on to Palestine, which became later Israel. Chava and some of her colleagues from the youth movement achieved to get the use of a house, actually a former villa in Bratislava. If I say villa, so you somehow see something very beautiful. It maybe was once a beautiful villa. At the time Chava got there, it was after months, many months, of Russian soldiers living there, and the heaps of whatever trash you want to imagine are undescribable. I wasn't there at the time, but I saw it in other places. Soldiers generally don't live very orderly, the places where they live, but the Russian soldiers were especially uncivilized. So Chava and mainly one of her friends, her girlfriends, but others too, cleaned out the house, really cleaned, I mean, physically with their own hands, and children started being found. As I said, from various places where they had survived, in various ages. And I will, because of limitations of time, I will just point out a very few of the cases we had. We had many tens of children at our wards, because generally the children were kept at our place and later in another place too for a few months, up to about half a year, and then sent on to Palestine. Actually, I'm coming to that point. Chava and others started receiving such children, and I was in the meantime in Prague and was convinced by emissaries who had come from Palestine to go to Slovakia because they needed their people to manage this children's house, and there was Chava as the, say, house mother or counselor, and they needed a man there. And since I was also a former member of the Maccabi Asir movement, they convinced me to go there. I went to Bratislava in the beginning of 1946. At the first moment we hated each other, Chava and I. It took about 3 weeks and then we fell madly in love. Since then it's 66 years and we can't get used to it. Okay, now about a few of the cases, because otherwise I can't describe it any other way. Case 1, a little boy of something like 6 or 7 years old called Karol. He was from Poland that we knew. We didn't know in the beginning of any family he had left. I don't even remember how he had survived. I know he was in concentration camps, somebody hid him. I don't know the details now, maybe Chava knows more. It's not really important. For example, that, I believe, 7 years old child, very clever, beautiful boy, once Chava caught him, it was not the only case and not with him the only case, lying. So Chava asked him, why did you lie? And that little boy says, you have to lie to survive, which is quite philosophical, and you know it today after all what happened, and so it's real, it's true. All of us lied who survived, but that was a little child who knew that already. The children, naturally, all of them, used to hide food under their pillows or so, because that's how they were used. If you have food, hide some of it for the next meal. You don't know where the next meal is coming from. This same Karolko one day disappeared. In the morning he went out and we didn't find him. Came back late afternoon. We searched for him until he came back. Where have you been? Well, I went traveling. What do you mean traveling? I sat on the trolley bus. There are such electric buses there in Bratislava. And he was so small that nobody saw him, not the driver and no inspector. He just, without any ticket and anything, just drove the whole day in the trolley bus through Bratislava. Finally, after about a year, I believe, or so, we found out through a very complicated way that he was the son of a couple of druggists in Warsaw, and we found that he had an uncle in Australia, and we sent him to Australia, and since then we have no contact. That was case one. Another one. A girl of about 10 years was put by her mother into a reformatory for girls, which was managed by a convent, by a Catholic convent. The mother perished, went to transport and perished, and the girls stayed in that convent until the end of the war, being treated horribly. All the girls were treated very horribly, not she specifically, but she too. She was, I would say she was recovered. She was found after a war by a cousin of hers and came to our house, where she spent something like a year or more, and later also came to Israel. She still lives, married in Haifa, children, grandchildren, even grand-grandchildren. Mia. Another case. And that last case, I'm not going to tell you more, there are many, many more. That last case actually became really known to us, or say, we came to remember it only some years ago, maybe in 1990, like 20 years ago or so, many tens of years after this time we are speaking about. One day, about 1990, I suppose, the phone rings in our place in Israel, and a male voice speaking in English asked, could I speak to Mr. Livni? I said, I am Mr. Livni. My name is Tommy Kraus. Do you remember me? The wheels start turning. I don't remember you, sorry. I don't think I've heard that name. Well, I would like to meet you. I just came from England. So we made an appointment. We invited him to come on Motzai Shabbat on Saturday evening. Saturday evening arrives a very well-dressed, good-looking man with a hat, religious, and tells us the following story. His brother and he were hidden by their parents, and the parents were being sent to transport somewhere in a village, in an orphanage. Am I correct? They were in an orphanage or something like that. Tommy Kraus and his brother. Anywhere, they were hidden somewhere, not in Bratislava. And when the war ended, Tommy, the smaller one, was sick and was brought to the Jewish hospital in Bratislava, which already functioned. For a time he was there, and then they found that there is an uncle with his wife living in Bratislava who had also survived somehow, but this couple was ready to take in only the bigger boy. And they didn't want the little child, who was 9 at the time. The child stayed in the hospital until they told him, "You will have to leave. We just can't keep the bed occupied for a healthy child." And he wandered around in Bratislava. As he tells it, he went by a little house not far from the hospital and saw children playing there and dancing in the garden. So he decided he wants to be there. He liked that. He came in, that was the children's home Chava and I were managing. We inquired where he was, who he was, where he came from, and we found, so he tells it, that he was that boy whom nobody wanted, and he stayed with us for about half a year or something like that. He told me, when he was in our place, that he remembers me as the first person who ever gave him a birthday present. Because at the time he was in our children's home, he had birthday, he had his birthday, and he remembered that I went with him downtown to a shop and bought him, how do you say it in English? A skater roller, something like that.
Roller skates.
Made from wood, and he'll never forget that the first time. But how did he come to find us? Now there comes a story inside the story, but that's the end of it. You know that the Baha'i faith has got a center in Haifa. At the time they were building their second grade building there, and they were looking for a firm of architects and engineers to supervise the building. And they had an international tender for that, and a British firm from London won the job, and they sent, okay, did I tell you the correct way? Not really. I forgot to tell you that we sent Tommy Kraus, a rabbi who was collecting, I would say, religious Jewish children, and Tommy was from a religious family. That rabbi in Slovakia took Tommy away from our non-religious home and sent him with other children to England. In England he was in a yeshiva for I don't know how many years, and at about age 20 one day I would say he told us he woke up that he doesn't know anything, he doesn't have a job and nothing, left the yeshiva, studied, made very fast high school and studied civil engineering and worked for a firm in London. Now I'm coming back to where I was. That firm that won the job in Haifa to supervise the building of the Baha'i Center sent Tommy Kraus with his wife that he had married in the meantime and 2 children to Haifa for 2 years to supervise the building. Tommy Kraus came with his car from England by boat, arrives at Haifa port, and goes to the clerk there who is to register the car and give him Israeli license plates and whatnot. And that clerk in the Haifa port asked for Tommy Kraus' passport, sees the passport and says, "You were born in Bratislava?" Tommy Kraus says, "Yes." "Well, I was too," says the clerk. So Tommy Kraus says, "So maybe you know a man called Max, I don't know his surname, and maybe that he is married with a slightly red-haired, bespectacled girl called Chava." So the clerk said, "Yes, that's my cousin Chava," and gave him our number and address, and that's how Tommy Kraus came to find us. Then they lived in Haifa and so on. Now, our personal story, we married very shortly in 1946, shortly after meeting. We were promised by the movement that we could accompany one of the groups to Israel, to Palestine, Israel, which didn't happen for a long time because there was nobody to take our place. So every half a year or so we were promised next half year, until it was the beginning of 1949 when we came to Israel, lived for a time on a kibbutz, later we left. And one of the outcomes of that meeting of Chava and me sits here.
So I have my mother's story, and I have to say, growing up as a kid, we didn't talk a lot about what happened. We all knew what happened. It just wasn't something that you talked a lot about. And as my parents got older, and certainly as we got older, we started to ask more questions, and ultimately asked my mother and my father to write their stories down, as well as my aunt. Oh, that's a good idea. So my mother is Hannah Simon, and she was a Fleischacker. So my grandmother was Katie Waldman from the Bertha side of the family. And neither of my grandparents survived. Both my grandparents were killed in a concentration camp. So, you know, again, it just wasn't something that we talked a whole lot about until my mother finally wrote her story. So I have her story, and I'm going to try to skip through a lot of it that's more personal, and then just talk a little bit about how she left Vienna, and then her time in Sweden, and then coming to America. And one of the things that struck me that somebody talked about the other day was how Vienna was the most wonderful place in the world. And when you look at my mother's story from the very beginning, Vienna was a great place, and their life was idyllic. And they went to Italy, and they went to France, and they went to Veldin, and they went to Yugoslavia, and everything in my mother's early life was just how terrific life was, how much they traveled, they skied, they swam, they ice skated, they danced. So a lot of the things that other people talked about. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to really... We had lived in such a sheltered environment. I couldn't care less what went on in the real world. My fights with Erica were the most unpleasant happenings, and of course the constant piano lessons. Fräulein Schweiger had become our governess because Muti was never home, and Anna had too many other things to do. That meant piano lessons every day, and I hated it. I didn't think it would be more difficult to write about the month that followed. I'll be brief, but you'll get the picture. We were out of school for 3 weeks, and when we returned, the principal and owner of the school was gone. It was a private school, tuition was high, and the principal owner was Jewish. All the other Jewish teachers were gone too. The Aryan teachers took a heavier load, and I can't remember the new teachers. There was only one class for each grade, about 50 kids in each class. The day we went back, we were assembled in the biggest room in the school. One of my least favorite teachers, who was now the assistant principal, informed us Jewish students that as our parents had paid for the whole year, we could finish that year as guests of the school. And you know what one does with guests. One doesn't like, one throws them out. Those were her exact words. Read some history books about what was going on. In those days, we heard about beatings, and worse, Anna wasn't allowed to work for us anymore, and we had to move to a small apartment. The old one was a combination office and living quarters. No summer vacation. We spent the summer in Vienna for the first time in my life. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal for most, but that change overnight, by no action or fault of yourself, was something very traumatic. And the mood in the family, where are we going? What are we going to do? Uncle Akalai, Hansi's father, was taken to Dachau concentration camp. Another cousin was beaten and made to scrub the street, and not to be at home, just if the SA came looking for them. We were lucky, nothing drastic happened to us, but the big question was, where to? Papa didn't want us to go to America. Everybody else did, Nella, Giza, and their families. So Papa had the bright idea to get baptized. Some countries took you in only if you were Christian. That was probably the worst experience I ever had. I felt 100% Jewish, and I felt like a traitor. I didn't think I was afraid that God would punish me. It was just so hard to accept one should have to lie and say, yes, I believe in Jesus Christ. But it didn't kill me. And we got our little slip of paper telling the world that we were baptized by the Anglican Church, and that was that. We spent the time best we could. My 14th birthday was 2 days after the Anschluss, and one of my presents was a game Monopoly. We played that a lot during the spring and summer. We went swimming in the Danube, went to the park. No one ever bothered me. But some people had a terrible experience. I guess we were lucky. But nothing came of Papa's efforts to get us out of the country. Erica had a chance to go to Israel, but Papa wouldn't let her. He found an organization who took young adults of 16 and over, 100% Jewish, to go to England. 4 of the older cousins on Papa's side were already there, and he felt Erica would be better off there. She was furious, but had to go. As for me, well, my baptism came in handy, and we got word that the Swedish mission had accepted me to go on a children's transport to Sweden, and they would find a foster family there for me. The transport took children under 16, either mixed religion or baptized, for they were the Christian organization. When my father heard that, he wrote to one of his erstwhile traveling salesmen who had found refuge in Sweden, if he could take me in. The answer was yes, I could go stay with them as their maid or nanny. I've never seen my father so angry. How dare he, after all that he had done for this man, to offer me up as a maid? And to this day, as you all know, I hate housework. And my mother did hate housework. So she's saying in January, her sister Erica left for England, and then she left for Sweden. We'll talk a little bit about her experience in Sweden. And basically, she got there, and there were a lot of other kids who all went to foster homes. And they had a difficult time finding a foster home for her. And they weren't allowed, pretty much the things that they were allowed to do was either be a nanny or be a maid or work on a farm. They weren't allowed to have any kind of occupation because they were aliens. So she talks about the kids that she met, and one of the things that she talks about as soon as possible, tearing up her baptismal certificate and how good that felt. Sorry, I'm just trying to move through this. So there was a woman who took in a few of the kids. One of the little kids, they were all placed in different homes. There was a 10-year-old who went to the editor of the newspaper, and finally she convinced the couple to find someone who would take me in. And they did. Tante Kirsten was 55 years old, a recent widow, owner of an apartment building, never had any children, used to be a farmer, and she took in, with the best of intentions, a girl of 14. Born and raised in the most elegant of cities, spoiled rotten all of her life, never had rinsed out a stocking, never made a bed, dusted a piece of furniture, or swept a floor. And of course she expected me to help her around the house. Do only the things she did herself. Here we go back to my father's rage that the salesman wanted me to be a maid. needless to say, she and I didn't get along very well, and I didn't stay there very long. So then she goes on to talk about how she ended up being a nanny for a number of different people. So she moved around to different places, different families. She would work for some families, and then if they went out of the country for the summer, she wasn't allowed to go. So she got put with another family for the summer and then would go back to them in the fall because she wasn't allowed to travel at all. And one of the things that she really wanted to do was be a dressmaker, but it was a trade that wasn't allowed. And then she finally did get the opportunity. They changed the laws, and she was allowed to finally be a dressmaker. And she was very excited. She wrote home to her parents to tell them that she was actually going to get to be a dressmaker. And that was the first time her letters came back. And so everybody knew that meant that her parents had been deported. And so she never heard from them again. The other thing that she talks about was the fact because her sister was in England and she was in Sweden, and because there was a war in the North Sea, they weren't allowed to exchange any kind of letters. There were no letters that went back and forth between Sweden and England. So she had no contact with her sister. And this is, my mother wrote this over a period of a number of years. So she would write something and then take like a year break and then write some more later. So it took her quite a while to write her story. So Erica finally came from England. She had gone over there, spent 3 years, and then decided to join the Army, and she was a cook in the Army. So Erica finally came to Sweden on leave, and she came on a rickety boat. I took an overnight train to Gothenburg, rented a room in a converted boat for us. Erica hated it because she had been violently seasick on the trip over, and I thought it would be so much fun. It was hard to get used to one another. It had been 6 years since we'd seen one another, and now we were both adults. But we had a good time. We rented a bike. We went to some farms where I had spent time. And then they went to the American consulate to get an appointment for my mother to get a visa. And then Erica went back to England, and she didn't come until 1946.
I couldn't quite.
Who didn't come, your mother or your...
I'm sorry, what?
Who came in 46? Your mother or his
My
sister?
mother came in 46, and then Erica came later. So then she says, now it's December 1946. I said goodbye to my friends. I returned my coupons for food and cigarettes, got my ticket, and went on the night train to Gothenburg. I was on my way to the United States. The money for the ticket had come from Tante Minnie, which we've heard a lot about. And I had a few bucks in my pocket, had sold my bike and radio, my most valuable possessions, and said goodbye to Sweden. I had a cabin with 3 other ladies, bunk beds of course, and as the youngest I got a bunk on the top, which suited me fine. It was pretty low, but we had a nice lounge, big dining room, and the same band that played for the better section played for us every second meal. The food was great. And one of the things that you hear through my mother's story is a lot of talk about the food, and that one place she stayed, they had to lock the refrigerator because she used to like to raid the refrigerator. So it was definitely a theme in my mother's stories. I got queasy enough, but I was just queasy enough, not to be able to smoke. It was kind of fun on the ship. Lots of refugees going to the States, full of hope and expectations. It was cold and stormy, but it lasted only 7 days, and then New York. Early in the morning, we passed by the Statue of Liberty on a sunny day. It was quite a sight, and yet too unreal. Just like all of the postcards I had seen of the skyline of New York. Well, I don't want to drag this out too long, but I have to tell you my funniest memory. We were in the dining room standing in line for passport control, visa check, etc., and a short interview. They asked if you spoke English, and I said yes. And she had learned to speak English watching movies in Sweden. They asked if there was somebody that was going to meet you, and I said yes. And just in case nobody was there, what would you do? And I said, I'd take a taxi to where my family lived. So the official said, I can see that you're going to be okay, but please take my advice. First thing you do, get a new pair of glasses because those look so damn European. So of course my family wasn't there. They had been told nobody would get off until noon, and so they had gone home. And then they went back and couldn't find me. But Cousin Nora's maid called the pier and had them paged and told them I was ready. All's well that ends well. Next day I took the subway to the Immigration Bureau to get my first papers and forever changed my beautiful name of Eva Johanna to Hannah. No middle name. But I didn't know it then, not until they told me 4 years later. Whatever you put on your first papers, that's what goes on your citizen papers. And it was something my mother regretted all of her life, that she wanted to be Eva Johanna. She talked about going back and changing her name and just never did. And then she met my father and they lived happily ever after. And my father also had come from Vienna, and my father ended up getting sent on the same Kindertransport as my mother, but 6 months later. So they had been in the same camp in Sweden,
Really?
but 6 months apart. And then he also came over to New York a little bit after my mother did. And that's it.
How did Minnie know, how was the connection to Minnie?
Because they were relatives.
What?
They were related.
Minnie was, yes, they were related.
Right, but how did Minnie keep up with her in Sweden if all the places were?
I think my mother communicated with Minnie, and then when my mother got to the United States, she stayed with Minnie for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then she moved in with Nella Alkali.
Oh.
I would
So she stayed with Nella,
imagine that your grandparents probably told Minnie where the girls went
I would imagine.
when they sent them.
Oh.
And what happened to Erica?
Erica is living in Vermont, so Erica also came to New York, and then she was in New York City, and then she moved to Newburgh, New York. My parents moved to Denver. And so Erica is alive and well and living near her son in someplace in Vermont and doing very well.
How old is he now?
Leora, she's
92.
Wow.
Yeah, almost 92.
She'll be
Leora
92,
and I
like-
were there visiting her last week. She lives in southern Vermont. I connected with her a couple of months ago when Leora reminded me that she was in Vermont. She is a pistol. She really is. She's
Her grandson was here,
Right.
and he said she still volunteers 5 days a week.
Yeah, she can't sit
Wow.
around and do nothing. She works in a yarn shop, she works in restocking books in a library. She teaches knitting to the ladies in the assisted living next to her. She's
Which is her
amazing,
grandson?
totally with it.
His name was Aaron Cornwell.
Is your mother dead?
My mother died in 2000.
The other thing was that Erica said to me the first time I met her, that your mother left Sweden before she left for England. So I don't know.
Which is not my mother's recollection, because my
Exactly.
mother says that Erica left for England in January, and then I think she said she left in April.
Yeah.
And you know, she says, I can't even tell you, she talks about going and saying goodbye to her mother, and her mother said she was sick, and she kissed her mother goodbye, and her mother buried her head in the pillow. And then her dad took her to the train station, and you know, she writes in there, I can't even tell you what it was like to prepare to leave. You know, it's just too painful. So there were still things that my mother would never talk about.
How do you think that your parents' experiences, even though not really talked about very much, affected your life and your outlook on life?
You know, it's interesting.
We want another week here, you can tell me. No, it's okay.
No. It's interesting because I was talking to Erica's grandson, And we had lunch with him yesterday, and we were talking about it. And in my family, you grew up, and our sort of favorite phrase is, it is what it is. You know, that crappy things happen to you, and it's not that you ignore them, but you move on, and you can't dwell on the past. And so I grew up in a family, I think, that was very stoic. And having a conversation with my cousin, you know, it was very much the same way that, you know, like I have friends that belong to Children of Holocaust survivor groups, and they go and they talk about it on a regular basis. And that just wasn't the way that you did things in my family. You know, it was really very much about, you know, you live this wonderful life, and then something horrible happens, and you lose your family, and you lose your identity, and you lose your country, but you find a way to go on, and you create something new, and you look back, but you really spend a lot more time moving forward. And whether that was the best way to deal with things or not, I have no idea, but that certainly is the way of my family, and I think the way of my cousin's family as well. So it absolutely changed who we are and the way that our lives were, but I'll never know what it would have been like in any other way. So it really was okay.
So you just laid it out, that, you know, a nice life and then it's lost, and you lose your country, you lose your family, you lose your identity. You can't be, at least initially, be doing the work you wanted to do. What do you think sustained you?
What?
What do you think sustained your mother, and having to live with people who are?
Well, she talks about, you know, that at first it was sort of like this adventure, and you had to look at it as an adventure. And then I think when she got told she was going to have to clean houses, it wasn't an adventure anymore. But I think that must have been the way her parents were, too. You know, that this is what you have to do, you're going to leave, you're going to do something different. And I don't know if that's the way she was raised as well. I mean, I did go back, when I went to Europe, I stayed with the woman that was my mother's governess. And I think she kind of helped explain a lot about my family. And I think that they were sort of, you know, my grandparents must have been the same way, that you find a way to deal with life. But my mother was probably the most incredibly resilient person I have ever met. So my mom was an amazing woman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
we have come the furthest, and I'm proud of that. Basically, I've got a few letters here that my grandfather Gaza has written to, from what I can work out, it's actually Hubba. But in the letters he says, "Dear Evie," I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, so I'm not sure if that's...
She was Evie before she was Hubba.
Explains a lot. I'm learning as well.
A little louder, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Shall I, do you want me to sit down? Or?
No, you're there, whatever you want.
This is translated from the original German. It's from Bratislava, June 1949. My dears, your long letter, late but always, made us very happy. The fact that we were first to get this letter by you means you think of us with much love, and we think of you. Dear Evie, your explanations about life were very interesting, though I imagine my future life somewhat different. The main thing that you are content, and that seems so. The biggest surprise is that your letter was not the jackals, nor the Yemenites, or the black Jews, but that declared that Agi has become more orderly.
You can't literally.
I don't know. These are basically selected excerpts from
1949.
the letters, so there may be some...
My aunt was known to be inorderly, so we said that The biggest surprise was to hear that Aggie became orderly. Wasn't something he would feel.
And where was he, when he wrote this letter, where was he?
He was in Australia.
No.
No? Was he still in Bratislava?
No, just some.
Oh, okay. Yep.
They were
Very
still in
good.
Bratislava before they immigrated.
Yes.
And you were in Israel?
I wasn't at all, but my parents.
Your parents were in Israel, okay.
Who is it?
The next batch
Grandfather.
explains exactly that.
Yeah.
We finally decided to emigrate to Australia and we'll work with full steam trying to get a passport. The matter is delayed from 1 week to the next, like strudel dough. I'm already so nervous from it like a horse, and in brackets. Now I remember that a horse isn't actually nervous, so please, I do not know what. We have already our boat tickets from July 28th from Genoa per steamship Vivaldi. And if I could put a little side note on that, I remember Mum telling me that she really enjoyed the trip and all the spaghetti that she could eat. This was the first time she'd had spaghetti. She remembers that with great detail.
This is Max's.
Just the food, and I think there was ice cream, which she enjoyed very much, being a young girl.
His name is Andrew.
We will also dock at Point Said. Say. I have already professional expressions like an old seafarer, but it is quite clear that in Bratislava we have the propeller, the Danube boat, so we will be quite near to you. Near but still extremely far, because I believe that it will be impossible for both of us or for you to arrange a meeting. We will probably have to wait until that we have our own airplane or yacht to visit you. And then there's further letters. Okay, this one again from Geza, translated from original German, 29th of the 7th, 1950 this time. Again, selected passages, so it may be slightly disjointed, but bear with us. It seems to be a sign of age that it pains me so much to see the family scattered in so many places. Again and again, I take the family pictures and yearn. According to your wishes, I start my report with Katka without bias. She's a very clever child. Excuse me. I did this last time too. In school, she is very good, and in spite of this, she still has problems with English. All that I could understand, she's like her daddy. But she's also very good. Her English is also very good. She understands and speaks well, and her accent is to be envied. By the way, she's the only one in the family who wants to go back to Europe, but she'll get over that. And that in itself is quite sad. Alice got a job embroidering. She does not very earn much, but has learned to work with an electric machine. Now we try to get work for her that she can do at home. That will be very good because Katka has no real home without Alice. And there's further down. I work as a contador at the largest Melbourne hotel in Australia. It is quite mean that you laugh, he's put in brackets. Possibly I will cease to do that, but in the near future and start my own. Not to provoke the evil eye, I want to tell you only so much that I am known here as a very good contador. Thanks to the Presbyter bagel I make, and it was proposed to me to found a business in partnership. The partners would supply the money, neither production. I hope to be able to make a report of something in my next letter. About a week ago I sent you a parcel, even though it was not as large as we would have wanted it to be. It has made us very happy because this was the very first parcel I was able to send to you. And that probably means a lot from what I can understand because we used to get a lot of parcels, or Mum did of course, from Minnie, which he remembers with great fondness, getting cookies and clothing, and it was sort of like a little mini Christmas with each package. Just lost my place. I'm convinced that we will be yet to be in a material position to send larger parcels. My words into God's ear. There is nothing new to report about our life. We are struggling now, but when Alice works, it is somewhat easier. On weekends we go visiting or have visitors, but that is our sole entertainment. The week passes with work, and in the evening we're so glad to be at bed. This is the case now too, as it's already 11 p.m. Good night, children. Many kisses to you all. Love, Gaza. And then basically my mother has actually written a short letter to all. I didn't think she'd actually do this. To all the family, a big hello from down under. If only circumstances had been different, it would be me standing here talking to you. I so wish that Andrew and I had made this trip together. But even if I had been able to overcome my fear of getting into a plane, I've always said that if God made me to fly, I would have been born with an airline ticket in my hand. David's illness would have been precluded me from leaving him for so long. So instead I'm sending you my representative from Australia and the branch of the Caroline clan. Not as good, I know, but the best I could muster. Seriously though, you will all be consistently in my thoughts, and I really do wish that was there with you. Things that give me great joy about this is how Andrew has taken you all into his heart and embrace, and you guys have embraced my family with open arms, and just how in turn you've done the same with him. As an only child, it's truly touching. I just wish my childhood had been so rich. As many of you seeing each other, not for the first time, David and I wish you all the wonderful reunion full of laughs and memories. Knowing that we were there in spirit, look forward to hearing many family stories and sharing many family photos. A very special thanks to those of you who opened up their homes to Andrew and Nicole. Without your generosity, this trip would not have been possible. And if they misbehave at some stage, feel free to give them a smack across the head. And remember, if any of you do feel like travelling to Australia, or coming to Paddock Kangaroo Koala, there's always a bed with her. Keep well and safe. Love to you all. Kathy.
Australia.
What's a contador?
I have no idea.
Must be a cook.
Story is somewhat more recent than these stories were. It's only 56 years old. And it tells you about how my brother George and my sister-in-law Julie and myself escaped from Hungary in 1956. 1956, yeah, it's 56 years ago this August. Actually, when we arrived in this country. Well, the story starts a little earlier because we always grew up with the notion that, as my father said, you kids will one day go out to Aunt Julia to America. And so we had this concept in our head, even though Aunt Julia invited my father to come after the First World War when he came back from a Russian prisoner of war camp, but he declined. And second time, when before the Second World War, he suggested that my father and the family come, but that didn't happen either. So then in 1956, we were there during the war, but in 1956, during the Hungarian Revolution, all of a sudden the opportunity opened up, and the border, which was surrounded with barbed wire and was taken off, and people started to stream out. And so my brother and my sister-in-law, they weren't married at the time, and myself decided to go in spite of some parental opposition. We had a plan. We were going to take the train to the border town, to Sopron, which is at the Austrian border, and meet up with other people who were waiting to cross the border. And so we had to get there, we had to take the train, and which was even before the revolution, it was impossible to get close to the border. You had to have a reason, you had to show justification why you would even travel to a border town. But this time it was open, and at the railroad station, the conductors were joking. They said, "This train is going to Canada," and so, jokingly, of course. And so we got on the train. There was only standing room. It's about a 3-hour train ride in those days to Sopron. It was only standing room. We were prepared for the worst. My brother dressed up as a peasant with a fur hat, so he should pretend that he was going to the country. And I had an English-Hungarian dictionary with me, and a towel and some clothes. And when Julia was carrying many small bottles of alcohol, just in case we meet a Russian on the border and we can hand it out. I mean, these were absurd notions, of course, but we didn't know any better, and there was no precedent, so we didn't know. We did what we thought was reasonable. So we were standing on the train all the way to Sopron, and went to the home of a rabbi. The rabbi was already out, left the country, and it was empty, and the apartment was kind of a collection place, and met up with other people. And the arrangement was that somebody will pick us up and take us to a border village, and he will be our guide, and he will take us over to Austria, and we give him a code. Once we are in Austria, he'll come back and collect the money. So this was the plan, and we went to this village house, and we had to wait until he supposedly knew when the guard was walking up and down at that stretch of border. And middle of the night, we started out, a very small group started out, crossing the fields. And it was raining the day before, so everything was very soft, and we had difficulty walking through. And halfway towards the border, the guide said, well, you see those lights, that's already Austria. I can't go any further. You have to just continue by yourself. So we didn't know whether we should give him the code or what. We had no choice. So we gave him the code, and we started going towards the light. Except the land was going there was a little dip, and we lost the light, and we got very easily disoriented in absolute darkness. So we continued, and finally we did see the lights again, and we arrived at the village, and the first thing was we looked at the street signs, and it was in German, so we knew it was the right country. We arrived in Deutschkreuz, which is a small town in Burgenland, Austria. And we were already people, the Austrians and the Red Cross was waiting for us on the other side, took us to a school and with other refugees. And luckily, and then we were waiting, or they were waiting until somebody made some decisions what to do with the people, except my brother, luckily and smartly, he had some money with him because he gave an interview to a Swiss newspaper man and he got paid for it. This was just a few days before we left. And we had an aunt in Vienna, so we bought tickets to the railroad and went to Vienna and looked up my aunt. And we arrived, and we stayed there a few days, and there were already the refugees from Hungary were helped, and they were organized, and they took us, or they provided for for the three of us for a room in a hotel. Well, don't think it was really a nice hotel. It was a little bit outside, and it was a run-down place. But anyhow, that's how we started our journey. And we stayed there for a while, and then they said you have to go into a refugee camp, otherwise the organization won't pay for the hotel. So Julie and myself sacrificed ourselves and went to the refugee camp while George was holding the room. So this lasted about a couple of weeks. And the refugee camp was a school with a gym and straw mats all around. Outside of Vienna, and every day we came back with hitchhiking and any way we could. But after 2 weeks, we could, they paid the bill, and then we went into a building for refugees. Now, meantime, people were already lining up at the American consulate for visas. And when we went there to get some information, we saw that the line for the consulate was around the corner, and they started to line up at night, the night before they could get into the offices. And we just said, that's silly, we are not doing that, we are not lining up. We have time, there's no rush, what's the rush? So much so that after a few weeks they closed the quota on Hungarian refugees, and we were stuck. We spent 8 months in Vienna, which would have been very nice. It wasn't bad, but we of course didn't know when that will end and when we can come to America. So actually, I did a little teaching I was an English major before, so I was teaching English to Hungarians, and then I got a job at the consulate because I knew German and English and Hungarian. So that was very fortunate, and so time passed, and we were getting impatient, and Julia was very getting impatient, and she did everything she could on this side of the Atlantic to contacted Senator Javits and wrote to him and so on and so forth to see whether they could get us into this country. Meanwhile, my brother also, which we didn't know, from Hungary, sent a few reports. He was a journalist, and he sent a few reports anonymously with a code name about the Hungarian conditions to Radio Free Europe or Voice of America. I don't even know which one. I think it was Voice of America. Was it, George? Was. Yeah. Was it Voice of America? And he contacted them, and they established the facts, and he pulled some strings, and he was able to write to the consulate. Anyhow, one day we were called in, and and given the visa as a result, and also the fact that I worked at the consulate helped to get my visa, and the three of us could leave. I mean, this was after 8 months of being in Vienna. We left Vienna by army transport, and we went from Schwehart, the airport there, to Shannon. From Shannon, of course, this was before the days of the jet. From Shannon to Keflavik, from Keflavik to Newfoundland, from Newfoundland to JFK, well, which was Idlewild Airport in those days. It was about a 24-hour flight, and I remember they didn't feed anybody. It was a full flight, no food. We were hungry. The stewardesses walked around with a tray and handed out chewing gum. So another small episode happened in Keflavik when, while we were refueling, Julie and I got off the plane to get some coffee or get something, and went to the cafeteria there, and there were some American soldiers, and started talking.
In Iceland.
And they were fascinated with our story. We were happy to get some coffee and talking. And we were watching the stewardesses when they leave. We figured we will leave also. And quite some time passed, and finally we went back to the plane. They were already closing the doors, and my brother was frantic because he didn't know where we were. So that was one of our little episodes. And in Idlewild, we arrived August 10th, 1957, and they took us by bus to Brooklyn, St. George Hotel. That's where they processed all the immigrants. It took some interviews and checking the papers and so on. And Julia was there, and my cousin on my mother's side, and my other aunt from my mother's side, and it was unforgettable event in our lives, and so here we are.
How old were you?
Julie was 21, I was 23, and my brother was 26.
How did you all get through the Holocaust?
Well, that's another time.
The other copy I had, so I have to read it off the board. This is a letter that Nathan Cloud wrote to the relatives in Europe when Paula died. Dear Mr. Lowenstein, it cannot be described with what feelings I am sitting down to write these lines to you, and you can only learn from the enclosed letter what calamity came upon us. I ask you to inform all of our dear relatives in the most considerate way possible, and then to let them read this letter, each of them separately. It is addressed to all our dear relatives. At present, I am not able to write to each of them separately, and that is why I ask you to explain to all our dear relatives why I wrote a letter meant for each and all of them. The reason why I send this letter to you is that you can prepare each of them at your discretion with a short explanation that dear Paula is ailing or very ill, and then add the remark, hopeless, etc. I leave this to your decision and thank you in advance. I hope that you are all well and take care of yourself. Finally, I ask you to tell dear Siggy in my name, if he holds me dear, not to drink wine or beer, and when he sits down to eat, he should get up hungry, e.g., never to overload the stomach, but rather eat less and more often. Please tell dear Giza that I just got a letter from her dear mama,
where she added a few words. The parcels from Tunak Bardak arrived today at Custom House. We'll release them soon and report. Greeting you and all cordially, I am your Nathan Clow. This is on Weiss and Clow stationery dated December 2nd, 1925. My dear all, first of all I want to confirm receipts of the letters, dear Fanchi, dear Bertha, and dear Giza, and we are always glad to hear from you, only good news, and to read about the good health of all of you, which is of course the main thing in life, since as long as one is able to guard oneself against illness, one should thank God, be satisfied with all the rest. And I would wish today to be in a position to report only good things. But God's will was different, so that today, alas, I am forced to report to you the hard blow of fate that fell on our family. On November 13th in the morning, I left my apartment with everything in perfect order. Dear Paula felt well, and I with dear Dave traveled to the factory. 1 hour later, dear Paula began to complain about her stomach and gases, etc. They immediately called our physician, and both he and Minnie were there with her very fast. Our physician ordered Paula to bed. He found that she had pains and gases, gave her medication, and after about 1 hour, dear Paula felt slightly better. Our physician called for a colleague, and when the latter arrived, her pulse was taken and found to be normal. But a short time later, the pains began to get more severe. Other physicians were called. Altogether, there were 4 at her bedside. But the gas pressure became stronger and more severe, and as our physician explained, the heart was unable to withstand that. And so our unforgettable dear Paula closed her eyes and fell fast softly to sleep, not to wake again. This was on November 13th at noon. To describe the feelings of all of us is unnecessary. In the morning in the best of health, and then so fast to suffer such a heavy blow. Not only that our family was and still is beyond comfort, but also all of our acquaintances and friends were touched deeply. They expressed commiseration I am not able to describe. She had been beloved and honored by all she met, so it is hard to describe how exceedingly large the participation was at the funeral ceremony at the synagogue and at the funeral procession. The temple was filled to capacity not only by our friends, nearest acquaintances, but also by people young and old who knew dear Paula only fleetingly, or people who had seen her years ago or known her. Commiseration was such as would hardly be expected for a woman who had no position in public life. Likewise, other expressions of condolence were at a scale well earned by the dear deceased. The line of cars that followed the dear deceased to the cemetery was many, many blocks long. After the interment, we held the usual minyan, and everything is done and proceeds as dear Paula merits in full measure. How deeply saddened we feel, one thing can be said in the name of the family. Quote, it is only body that left us, but not the soul. That will remain with us forever. And we all shall keep her memory in such a way, and will shape the life of our family in a manner as if the dear deceased would still be among us and all her wishes fulfilled. I would also like to mention that dear Paula was happier during the last 3 months than in years, because she was convinced that she had no diabetes and she ate practically everything she wanted. And you can imagine how cheerful she was under such circumstances. That probably would have killed her. During the last weeks, I engaged for dear Paula a lady's companion. Dear Paula got to like her very much. Every evening when I came home, she related to me how happy she was to have such a nice person looking after her so well, and this person gave dear Paula so much comfort that it cannot be described. In short, it seems that she had everything in such a measure that there was nothing left to wish for, and just then she left us. Now think about the feelings I have while writing this letter to you. I only comfort myself that the Almighty bestowed upon us the fortune to live together for so long, that dear Paula always had a happy, cheerful, and satisfied life, and could also marry off her children well, thanks to God. And she had the gratification of her children and grandchildren.
Wow.
So we don't know of what she died?
called
She got a heart
apoplexy.
attack.
It's called
Heart gave
apoplexy.
Yeah, I mean, everybody else had a heart attack. She probably did.
Might just-
Where is she buried?
Pardon?
Where is she baried?
She's in the
Buried in
mausoleum.
Maimonides Cemetery in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn. Where?
As Mom was saying earlier, prodigious diaries every time she went traveling, which was every summer probably. And Mom said there are copies there for anybody who wants them of the 1905 diary. Is this too loud? I can't tell what's too loud and not too loud. So Mom and Leora have highlighted some sections they want me to read. This is from 1905. June 12th, landed in Cherbourg, met by Shonda and Ludwig. June 16th, arrived in Vienna, met by Grandma and Uncle David. Immediate train to Baden, spent lunch and evening with Aunt Fanny. Okay, the next day, concert with Aunt Helene. The day after that, Vienna, called at Uncle Siggy's house, 6 p.m. June 20th, arrived Marienbad. Is that how you say it? Marienbad. That's what I thought. But looked for Aunt Julia at hotel. Went for a walk and returned to find her already there. Walked and toured, dinner, and then trained to Egger, met by Papa's folks. So that would have been Leopold Oppenheimer's people. Oh no, Nathan Cloud's people. June 23rd, left for Vienna, then trained to Pressburg. Went to Aunt Bertha's store while Mama and Papa went to hotel to engage rooms. Evening at Uncle Max's, where met all relatives. The next day, temple with Uncle Hofbauer. Then to bread factory to see evening bread made. Then to Uncle Hofbauer's. Went with Siggy to cafe. The next day was Sunday. Folks went to cemetery, then to Aunt Carolina's. Went to yearly market. Folks went back to Baden, dinner at Cafe Hungary. 6:26, Nella arrived, day spent roaming around the city. 6:28, as the day was warm, we decided to stay indoors and sew. Evening spent in keeping cool. Went to military band concert. 6:29, helped Julia finish her waist. Then to the mountains with Helene. Nameless bouquets started to arrive at hotel, kept coming. Do you know who they were from?
No clue.
7:3, it was too hot to do anything. Evening walk to Uncle Max's in company of Morris Fleischhofer. A bouquet arrived this morning. July 7th, we spent the day making visits. In the evening, we had a family reunion at Cafe Hungaria, received a bouquet. July 8th, the folks, including Aunt Yulischka and myself, had breakfast in the city. In the afternoon, we all went to the Cafe Hungaria. In the evening, we supped at an open-air restaurant where the military band played. Returned today's bouquet. She didn't like him. July 9th. After making some purchases, we drove to Bernard's house where we had dinner. In the afternoon, Aunt Carolina and family drove us to the station where Aunt Bertha and Nella waited for us. After the folks left, Uncle Brown drove to Aunt Yulischka's, who went with us to the Air Cafe where messengers later came. Uncle Fleischhofer arrived late that night. Returned today's bouquet. 7:13. Visited Aunt Yulischka and found her quite improved. In the afternoon, Aunt Carolina, Nella, the messengers, and I went to the arena where we saw Friggs. Whatever that's in quote, it must have been a show of some sort. We returned to the Cafe Hungaria where Aunt and Uncle Fleischhofer and Siggy waited for us. After the rain stopped, we went home. July 14th. I took the train to Vienna alone, where the whole family awaited. After many purchases, we returned to Baden on the 6 o'clock train. In the evening, we all were at Grandma's. It's a shame that nobody ever talked to her about Regina. Yeah. July 24th. Began early preparations to go to Vienna. Arrived there around 4 o'clock. After making many purchases, we went to Aunt Pollock's, where we saw the most Orthodox temple in Vienna. July 25th. After a late breakfast, we mounted an electric car at the Prater Stern to go to the Burg. The first compartment we visited was the Schatz, or treasure room. They contained the crown jewels and the robes belonging to the kings and queens of Austria. After our visit was concluded, we ate dinner and took our luggage with us to the train for Budapest. We arrived there at 9:30 and were received by the whole family. We went to the Hotel Hungaria, where we soon retired. July 26th. In the morning, we took a carriage to Aunt Emma's house in Buda, not Pest. That's inserted by Mom, I think, where we spent the day. Very pleasant. In the evening, we stayed in the cafe in the hotel until bedtime. 2 days later, July 28th, from there we went to Parliament, where we saw the council chamber and its various tributary rooms. The building, all in all, is very beautiful.
How'd they get from place to place?
Who's
They took
Julia
friends.
Steiner?
Friends?
We don't know.
Oh, she got engaged.
Find out.
We next saw the stairway of the Curia, or Criminal Courts building. The sightseeing over, we went from there to the station to take the train for Pressburg. We arrived at 5 p.m. I stayed with Nella, but the folks went to the hotel as Mama did not feel well. We spent the evening at the hotel. July 30th. Helped Nella this morning, went to Air Cafe for this afternoon, and then to the Hungaria for supper. July 31st, Issacher and Aunt Lena left. Who are they?
They're Clow relatives.
Oh. August 2nd. Spent the day as usual. Spent the evening at Aunt Yuloshka's house and afternoon at Hungaria. August 3rd. The folks left this morning for Vienna. Received a beautiful box of candy. Somebody was upping their game. The evening was spent at Uncle Max's as we went to the station to get the men folk who had gone to Uncle Wolf's funeral.
Just a minute. Uncle Wolf funeral, that was the brother of David, who lived in Shamorin. And he was buried in Shamorin. They all went to Shamorin for the funeral.
The
and
same,
they went to the train station.
the same cemetery we went to?
Yes, yes. And then when they came back, they all went to the train to wait for them.
Well, then they went to the Cafe
And
Hungaria.
by the way, that's how I found this Wolf's death date. So it's not always document. Sometimes a diary that a young girl wrote, and then I have the date of his death, of his funeral.
Impressive.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So after the funeral, they went to Cafe Hungaria and then for an evening walk. August 5th, went into the Gayberg early, spent the day there. In the evening, Cafe Hungaria. That was her birthday.
They must have had a charge account at the cafe.
Yeah. August 8th, made goodbye calls in the morning, left for Pressburg at 3, arrived at 6 at Baden, spent the evening at Grandma's. August 10th, spent the day packing. August 11th, folks went somewhere with Aunt Yuloshka and Carolina came at 2 o'clock. Spent the evening at Aunt Franchi's. August 12th, spent the day with Grandma until 4, then took the train to Vienna. There met Uncle Siggy and Aunt Helene, who remained with us until we left for Paris at 8:05.
I believe this person.
Unless Nathan Clow's mother was also in Baden or something?
No. Regina spent her.
Okay.
He was German.
So it was
It was Regina.
Gina.
Where did Regina live?
In Bratislava.
In Bratislava.
And Baden is, it's not Baden in Germany, but it's Baden by V. It's between Bratislava and Vienna.
Oh, I thought it meant Baden-Baden. and-
No, it's not that Baden-Baden.
It's Baden by V.
So she knew.
So this, when she says spent it with Grandma, she's talking about
She's about
Regina?
Regina.
Yeah.
Regina, yeah.
What languages did Minnie speak besides English?
I assume German.
I never heard what else.
She must have. Yeah.
Well, what did Julie speak?
Hungarian.
English or Hungarian, or both?
Hungarian.
Hungarian, so your grandmother must have also spoken to her in Hungarian. Oh,
Well, she spoke English, but she was Hungarian.
Julie, the cook.
The cook. Yeah, she spoke.
She spoke English.
Okay.
But she was Hungarian.
You know,
Yes,
question
she must
about
have.
it. Oh,
Is that it?
That's all.
but it's a very good job.
Since Cafe Hungaria is a central figure in this diary,
They were going someplace every day, they must have,
well,
It's good to have a
thanks to
large family.
Hava's sleuthing, we found a picture of Cafe Hungaria. So along with the picture of the diary is a picture of Cafe Hungaria.
very nice.
Where was it? In
In
Bratislava?
Bratislava. It's right on the square. We ate there, I don't remember the name of it now.
We ate
Cafe
there?
Berlin, I think it was.
Yes.
Cafe Berlin, and
When
we
we were
all ate
there?
there.
We ate
It is
there?
still there.
We
It
ate
still has a
there?
very good pastry.
You should have said put it on the tab.
They want to know, did they all eat there?
No, not together. No, just
No. And the amazing thing about this diary room, which I mentioned last night, is that she touched base with every single one of the family members except Theodore, except one.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was
How old was she when she wrote that?
No,
1905. She
one is
was.
not here in this diary. Adele, oh, she's in the other diary. They went
So Adele, I knew there was one of the whatevers, however.
take her husband with her on these trips?
She wasn't married. She
This
was
is
there
1905.
with Paula
And it was.
and Nathan and Dave. Yeah. I don't know about Nathan, but she and Dave and Paula were on this trip. She was.
Dave didn't keep too many diaries.
Well, he was very young. I mean, how old? He was born in 94. This was.
No, she was born in 86, so she was 19.
And he was 11. I mean, this was like the year that Paul and Nathan got married.
No, they were married in
1899.
Married when he was. Well, it was the one he adopted them.
Yeah, she was adopted when she was in that year. So
I can remember that.
that was one of the significant things about this diary. In addition to the fact that it rained every day and they didn't go out, or it was too hot to go out, and I don't know
So
what they
who was
did in
sending the
hotel all day
flowers?
long.
Nobody knows.
The
What'd you
big
say,
mystery.
Dave? Jimmy?
The flowers, who was sending the
We have
flowers?
no idea, the
The candy.
flowers and the candy,
Right.
no clue.
And
So
she sent them back.
she didn't tell us.
She only mentioned relatives, no non-relatives.
To send them back.
So,
I mean, was you think it was a suitor?
of course it was a suitor, but who knows
But
who it was.
where'd you meet him?
Somebody trying to get a visa.
family at Cafe Hungarian.
Yeah, he's a waiter from Cafe Hungarian.
Who were these messengers?
Maybe it was
that
her.
they-
All right, anyway, if you'd like copies of the diary as it was written, I transcribed the whole thing,
It
so.
was written in German?
No, this was written in pencil, and believe me, 100 years later, pencil ain't easy
But
to
she must have
read.
been multilingual? She was
Grandma
Many.
was, yes.
Yeah.
Many
Did
was,
you
yes.
make copies of that wonderful letter that Grandpa wrote? Did you the copy?
I can send you one if you email me,
So many things.
Why don't we scan it and put it on the web?
because it's on the board and,
I can do it for you.
That'd be good.
what? I think you have it.
I have it.
And I have it in my email.
Did she travel like that every year till she got married?
We have diaries from 1905,
So that was his
1908, 1909, when she was married.
Did she ever go to college?
No.
Many?
Lucy, did you read that letter to me?
Pardon me? What?
Wasn't that letter there